Welcome to the Wisconsin Podcast. I'm Craig Sauer. On this podcast, we talk Wisconsin things, everything from media, sports, culture, nature, politics, and more. In this episode, I explore the Wisconsin history site, Old World, Wisconsin. Old World, Wisconsin, an open-air museum located near Eagle, Wisconsin, depicts Wisconsin's immigrant past by recreating the sights, sounds, and spirit of those who crossed land and oceans to come to this state to build their futures. The museum's more than 60 historic structures, brought to the site from locations throughout the state, range from ethnic farmlands with furnished houses and rural outbuildings to a traditional small-town village. My guest, Anna Altschwager, the site's Assistant Director of Guest Experience, explains how the museum came to be and what she hopes guests take away from their experience.
Every garden here, there's over 14 heirloom gardens. Every plant that goes in the ground is the right plant for that ethnic community and that time period. All of the animals that are here are heritage. So it's just that sensory treat, right? The costuming, the sights, the sounds, the smells. So if you haven't treated yourself in a while to just feeling completely transported and just get out of your everyday, like I'm looking at the cell phone, I'm going to work, I'm in the car, I'm driving, like the rut, right? Let us help you step outside of that and treat yourself.
Prior to coming to Old World, Wisconsin, Altschwager worked at a historic site in Ohio, and before that worked as an exhibition project manager at the Field Museum in Chicago. She holds a master's degree in history museum studies from the Cooperstown Graduate Program and a bachelor's in art history and material culture from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. First of all, what the heck is Old World, Wisconsin? What is this?
What is it? That is a great question, much debated. Living history is the traditional name that's used for this type of experience. Different places call it different things. Technically, it's 600 acres. It's 60 buildings representing the immigrant cultures that came to call Wisconsin home in the late 19th and early 20th century. It is so much more than that. It is a beautiful natural space. It is an experience for all ages. It's about story. It's about engagement, exploration. We struggle with what to call it. There are peer institutions in other states that use terms like living history parks, open air museums. There's a lot of different ways to talk about it. And it's a continuing conversation we have about what are we and what are we doing. We're a good time and everybody should come spend some time with us.
If somebody comes here, what kind of experiences do they have?
Yeah, so if you come to Old World, Wisconsin on a regular day when we're open 7 days a week for a good chunk of the summer, it's self-guided. You get a map, you get a sheet letting you know what special activities are happening when we might be milking a cow or when there might be an animal encounter or a certain demonstration. And you get to explore. You travel in time. You start up front. It's 2018, 2019, whatever year you're here. And then you travel across the site. You can walk, you can take a tram, you can step into the buildings, chat with our experienced facilitators who are there. We have amazing stories to share with you. You also have amazing stories to share with us. And it's about exploring who we are and who these people were who came to call Wisconsin home. You're going to smell new things and taste new things and try new things. We joke that if your hands are in your pockets, you're doing it wrong. This is not a stand there and be talked at museum. I'm putting air quotes around museum. This is a travel in time and share a lot of stories.
So this place was started in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the origin story, why it was created. What was the point at the beginning?
Yeah, the original intention, so a lot of history organizations started in the 1970s with the focus on the bicentennial. So there's a lot of interest from the public. There's a lot of momentum from scholars and a lot of changes in the field of history in the 1970s. There's also a lot of funding in the 70s that made a lot of it possible. So the intention was to create an outdoor museum, a living space to celebrate the immigrant cultures of Wisconsin, primarily using architecture. And the term they use at the time is folk form architecture. So these were architectural styles that were specific to immigrant communities who came to Wisconsin that were being lost. So buildings that were built, fachwerk and different stone types and different log building types that just, some of these are homes that had been turned into old storage sheds on the farm, when the new 1940s farmhouse was built. And the original curators saw that this was a loss. These buildings they were literally falling apart. So they traveled the entire state and collected buildings, like you do. And they brought them all here. They took them apart piece by piece by piece. And in several of the buildings, you can actually go in and see the numbering and see how they put them all back together. They had to do some detective work because the buildings hadn't been altered over time. So they really had to decide when in time are we going to restore this building to. And then once the buildings were here, they create composite farmsteads. So they wouldn't take a single family's farm and move all of the buildings, all the barns, the outbuildings, the sheds, and the home. They would pick a good example of a barn, a good example of a home, a good example of a woodshed, and then create composite experiences here that were iconic or emblematic, or the right word would be evocative of a specific immigrant group's experience here in Wisconsin. And that's what we have for guests to explore today.
Is there any hope to bring more buildings? Is that a thing of continual conversation of, are we going to add some more buildings? Have we found a new thing that we're going to add?
Absolutely. So one of our big rallying cries is the dynamism of history, right? History keeps changing. It keeps moving. History is a story we tell ourselves. And as we move forward, our stories move forward as well. So it is an ongoing conversation. The original master plan that was created had a lot more pieces that just weren't achievable when we first opened in the 70s. Time, money, availability. They tried to find certain buildings and they just couldn't. So it is an ongoing conversation. And we talk about the 1930s, which is a fascinating time to talk about immigration in the United States between the wars and how that played out in terms of national policy on the everyday lives of immigrants who are now second and third generation immigrants here. We talk about the 1950s and the role of Latinx migrant workers and what that means in terms of the story that we tell ourselves about the dairy industry and the dairy state. That is an impossible story to tell if you're not going to look at the migrant workers that made that possible. I'd love to talk about a reservation story, to look at, maybe the Oneida story and what is that lived experience for people who call this place home. So yeah, it's myriad possibilities. It's a question of opportunity and partnerships. We do everything in collaboration and partnership. And I'm excited to see what we can do. But history keeps changing, so we're going to keep changing.
One of the highlight things that happened in the last couple of years here is a program, I think it's called the Wisconsin Journey.
Yeah.
It's been written up you might have seen articles in the Chicago Tribune and Journal Sentinel, Wisconsin State Journal. It's been around. Tell me about the Wisconsin Journey and what that's all about.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, when guests come to Old World, their daily experience is one of self-guided exploration, kind of set your own day, and you can engage kind of as deeply as you want to. We wanted to create an experience for guests that was more focused, a small group experience that really let you sink into one of these stories and literally take on the role of some of these immigrants who came to call Wisconsin home. So Wisconsin Journey is one of these guided experiences. It happens in the fall. You have to register in advance for it. It's got limited tickets, so plan ahead. Get your tickets online. Just happens 3 times a day in groups of 12. And you go through 3 historic spaces out on site, and you meet a group of immigrants who are coming to Wisconsin from Sweden on a boat called the Svea. And you hear about their journey and where they settled. You take on the identity of one of these community members. So you might be Charles Hammerquist or Tur Kumlin or Sophia Wahlberg, and you learn about who they are, what motivated them, and then what happened when they got here. You unpack their trunk and see what kind of belongings they brought with them. You face challenges as an individual and as a community member, and you do this sitting around one of the kitchen tables in our historic home. So it's a really kind of deep way to experience the spaces. And then we pull it forward and we have a contemporary conversation with these people that you've just spent an hour and a half with getting to know. And we talk about things like, what does it mean to call this place home? And is there a difference between identity and citizenship? And those conversations are awesome. They go everywhere. Sometimes it's purely historic. Sometimes it's really contemporary, depending on what the newest headline was that day. It's just a great way to carve out time in your daily life, in your space, to think about these things and what is your story and what's the story you tell yourself, and what community are you a part of.
Those conversations must be fascinating because, I mean, in the world that we live in right now, it's a very divisive time. We all know, we all feel it, we all see it. And there's a lot of conversation about immigration these days and what it means. And I'm just kind of curious have you experienced any negative conversations, you know what I mean, through the whole thing? I mean, it just seems like,
yeah, it could be a little loaded.
It could go many different places. So what's kind of the feeling on that?
It could. And that's something we knew developing the program. And it's something that we're very cognizant of when we train our staff. So we do a lot of storytelling training and improv, and we talk about yes and this concept of a gracious redirect. And so even when you have someone in there who has maybe come into the program with a very clear point of view about what immigration was and what it is now, and maybe they see a difference between historical immigrants to Wisconsin as opposed to contemporary, and they share those views, which they are welcome to share. We really want to embrace multiple perspectives and meet that with a redirect or a reframing. And we're not here to change people's minds, but we're here to maybe add some layers of complication or add some layers of nuance to just pause and reflect a little bit. I will say that those experiences of someone trying to be intentionally divisive or pot stirring, few and far between. They are normally really gracious conversations and people sharing stories. People automatically draw parallels between this community that we've just spent time with, the Swedish immigrant community in what was then Wisconsin Territory. You can't help but when you meet these people to draw connections to your own family story or the stories that your grandma told you. And people are so kind and generous when they share these stories. They become universal conversations as opposed to anything that might feel contentious. And they're so open and they share so much. And we love leading that. It's almost a little bit about who gets to take Friday's tours, because they're such great conversations to have with people.
Having gone through have this program, does it really reinforce to you the value of history and the continual relevance of what history can tell you about current events? And I'm just kind of curious, going through this and having all these conversations, has your perspective changed, or have you seen something different about the current experience, the current immigration experience, having these conversations, doing the history work?
Yes, and yeah. So yeah, it's been a great exercise in seeing the power that history has, and seeing what happens when people approach history in a different way. Oftentimes when we think of history, it's got a capital H, right? And it's this thing you learned in school, and it's a list of names and dates and places, and you're good at history if you can remember all of those things in order, right? Like that's how it works, right? And for a long time, that was the way we approach it. The shift right now in both how history is being taught in schools and explored at higher levels is history as a process. So in the same way that when you learn science, you don't just learn the results of an experiment, right? You learn a scientific method. You learn how to ask questions. And at the heart of history is the exact same thing. It's about how to ask questions and how do we learn about our story? How do we tell our story? How do other people see our story? How might someone in the future see my story? To be super nerdy, it's like a 20-sided die, right? And so it's a single thing that you can look at from a ton of different perspectives, which is one thing to talk about at this theoretical level. Like in graduate school, let's use historical thinking skills. But when you take a program like Wisconsin Journey and you make it about individual people that they've just met, that they have a connection to, you fold in their own grandmother's stories, you fold in your own community stories, it becomes much less theoretical and much more applied, right? It becomes meaningful, and it just naturally comes together, and people see the relevancy, they see the power of it, they see the connections. I'm like, oh, well, it's just like today. And we don't say those words, our guests say those words. And so our goal isn't to teach history. It's to create a space where people can explore it, and they'll see those connections. We know they're there. We know the power of it. We have drunk deep of that well. we are convinced that this is going to change the world. But the trick is creating a space where other people can find that themselves, because that's the most powerful thing, is if you figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, there's also another relevancy question I think I have about museums and public places, maybe in libraries, things like that. I think a lot of institutions like that, museums, libraries, are trying to figure a new path forward to be relevant, just as a place where people want to come, not only to do history, but just to be a public place.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you thought about that at all as it pertains to Old World Wisconsin.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of it is the framing of spaces and how we think of them. There's a lot of chatter about third spaces, right? Like, it's not home, it's not work. There are these other spaces. We also have to fold in the layer of the idea of being an attraction or being a tourism destination. People only have so much time and only so much money. And they could go to Six Flags and they can go to Wisconsin Dells, but they choose to come to us. And so we have to meet them where they are. We have to think about their motivations and what are they looking to get from it, and find that sweet spot between, we know you want to have fun, we know you want to hang out, so we're going to be relevant in that way. But it's not just a question of meeting those basic needs. To be truly relevant, there has to be a takeaway, right? There has to be that thing you're still thinking about on the way home. It wasn't just of interest, but it had an impact. And that's where, for us, story is the greatest tool in that, is to give you something that you're still kind of chewing on, still thinking about. And maybe the end result is you come back and hang out with us next summer or on a future weekend. But maybe it's you talk a little bit longer on the phone to your grandma the next time you talk to her. Or at Thanksgiving, you ask to make that recipe that Yaya used to make. Why did we stop making that? We should keep doing that. And that's what relevancy is to us, is that continuation of the story, not just the single visit, but that motivation for your life moving forward.
So I'm going to ask you a really tough question to do really densely. But can you tell me the broad strokes of what people really need to understand about the immigrant experience to Wisconsin that you're trying to tell here? What are the broad things because there's so many ways you can take that, but what are the important things that I think all Wisconsinites should really know about the immigrant experience here?
You realize that people have entire professional careers built around. Yeah, you could write a book or 12. Or 12, yeah. You could have an entire society dedicated to figuring this out. In a nutshell, so a couple of big ideas kind of come to the surface really quickly with that. And I think one is just the universality of immigration as an experience. And it is not unique in any way. It is something that people have been doing since people started moving. And immigration it's a mechanism that's about both push and pull. And oftentimes we fall into this trap of you ever see the movie American Tail with Fievel, the little mouse, right? Mm-hmm. There's streets are paved with cheese and there's no cats, and it's going to, everyone running towards something. So a pull towards an idea. Oftentimes immigration is a push, and it can be a very traumatic push, and thinking of immigration in terms of migrants and refugees as well. But immigration is this movement of people. So I think the universality of it, the duality of it, that it's a push and a pull. And specifically with Wisconsin, it's the enormity of it. It's not this homogenous thing. It wasn't the land was empty and then Germans showed up. I mean, there's the entire prehistory of all of the people who were here before modern quote unquote immigrants started showing up. You have all of the indigenous first people who were here. And even those are stories of relocation and movement and immigration. Layered on top of that are these initial waves of European immigrants. And then it's a continual process. There's our Hmong community is phenomenally huge. And what makes Wisconsin really special is that all of these different identities still express themselves today. It did not get diluted down. This whole idea of a melting pot, it doesn't melt together. It's like a fantastic chunky goulash, right? It's all in there. You can see it all. You can go to a German fest. You can go to a powwow. You can go to a Chesky Den in one weekend. And that is fantastic. And not many places have that. Was that short enough? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was amazing. That was great. I didn't know how you were going to do that. and you did it really well. I also want to ask you kind of a personal question because I've been thinking a lot about this and been reading a book about this, about moving, leaving a place, and identity. And you've been a person that's moved around a little bit for school and different things, different jobs. When you came here, you were coming back to Wisconsin, I believe,
Yeah.
for the first time in a few years.
Yeah.
Did you think about moving and the changing of your identity and all the hardships that come with moving? It's easier to move maybe home, but you're still changing a lot of the
it's still a
things in your
pain.
life.
Yeah.
I mean, did some of those things come up when you were doing the research and learning about this site?
Yeah. I think that initial, the coming home, Wisconsin has always felt like home. And I kind of realized that in drips and drabs. Like even as an undergraduate, I was doing an internship in Washington, D.C., and people would be like, "Oh, you're from Wisconsin. That's a great place to be from." And I kind of would just pause, like, "Well, that's super backhanded. Like, what is? Let's unpack that a little bit." And I hadn't really thought about it before then. And I've been gone for about 14-ish years. Always thought of it as home. I had the opportunity in the last couple of years to work in Ohio, and my daughter is born in Ohio. So I'm a Badger. She is a Buckeye, but we still love her just the same. But everyone was so deeply passionate about the story of Ohio and the dynamism of that history. And I kept thinking like, oh, this is super interesting. This is really great. I wish I felt that way. Like it didn't pull at my heart the way that I was seeing it manifest with my peers. And I realized I felt that way about someplace else. It also was a chance to reflect back on my own family history, the deeper family history, and what does it mean to be from a place. And through my own family history, I have one branch of my family that has actually been in North America since the 1640s. Other branches that came specifically to Wisconsin in the 1840s and 50s, but they all ended up in Wisconsin through different paths. And to reflect on that and what does it mean to be from a place. And I encounter it every day in my work. And I love meeting with people who have that same feeling about Wisconsin and sharing that, but also with people who feel that way about someplace totally different. Because again, it's that universal experience of what does it mean to call a place home. And even when the weather is awful and, like, why in February do I live here? And then you see the sun through the trees and you can reflect back on these immigrants who came to this place and what they endured and their stories and that shared beauty of place. I'm sure that some of our immigrant families whose stories we tell here, they had those same moments of standing there being like, wow, I can feel the breath freeze in my nose this morning while I'm doing chores. But God, that sun is beautiful on the edge of the trees, and there's that emotional tie you have to a place.
I also want to ask you, since we're talking a little bit about your background, I want to ask you a question about the Field Museum because it's I think most people know what that is, hopefully, but it's an institution. It's a piece of history in and of itself.
It is.
Of all the museums in the country to work for, that's a pretty good one.
I loved it.
Can you just tell me what that experience was like to work there as somebody who is interested in history and all museums and things like that?
It was amazing. I loved Chicago. I loved working at the Field. It was a fantastic group of people. I mean, just really, and it was my first big kid job. Right. So completely out of grad school, okay, I'm really going to do this. I'm a museum person. And so I was there for the first 7-8 years of my museum career. You've had that feeling in the same way you might at a university or a library and walking in oh, these are hallowed halls. You had that feeling when you walked into the main hall, Stanley Field Hall there. And more than once, when you have those days and the projects due and the budget isn't done and just the chaos and the clutter of, because it's a job, right? And it's highs and lows. And you walk in and you go, oh, I really love working here. and knowing that you were on the shoulders of all of these people who came before. And also just the experience of going down on the floor. It's the same thing I do here at Old World. You go out on site and you eavesdrop essentially on people, and you see the experience they're having, and you hear them excited, and you hear them sharing their own stories. To be able to be a part of that, of so many guests who have those formative museum experiences at places like the Field, just the awe and the wonder, and to be like, I got to do that. Like, I did that. Like that, they're going to have that memory forever. And I help be a tiny part of that. They'll never know me. They'll never know that I fought for that object to be on display, or, that story. Yeah, that one. We're so glad that story made the cut. They'll never know about that process. But to help craft those experiences is pretty amazing.
Is there anything that you take from that time there that you've carried on in the later parts of your career? Is there anything you learned there that this is going to follow me? Like, I understand this.
Oh, absolutely. We joke that after you did 5 years at the Field Museum, they should just give you a graduate degree.
Fair enough.
So I worked in the exhibitions department. I was an exhibition project manager, and I worked mainly on permanent exhibitions. So if you've been to Restoring Earth or the Granger Hall of Gems or the Tang Hall of China, that was my team. We did all of that. And with amazingly talented people. I do not want to make it sound like I did those things. I helped make sure those things got done on time and in an orderly fashion. I think the big lessons for me are just the collaboration and how collaborative museum work is. No one's going to have the winning idea. It's all about bringing amazingly talented people together and coming up with what the best solution is for what our guests need and what is the story we're crafting, and just leveraging all of that talent and respecting all of that talent is huge. The art of storytelling and a nuanced story that people can see themselves in. So it's not just a what, but it's a why. And it's a why that they understand and they can connect to emotionally. It's what really good exhibits do. It's what really good stories do. It's what we hope to do here with our experiences at Old World. I think just appreciating the, as I said earlier, like the tradition that we are a part of. There's a role of stewardship. There's a legacy. We are the keepers of these stories or these objects or these buildings, so that 300 years from now, somebody else can find a new part of the story and it'll be meaningful to them. I don't know who they are or what the story will be, but we're a part of that chain, that process.
You talked a little bit about crafting experiences for people and being kind of that unseen hand of guiding them through the story a little bit. I'm wondering if you had one of those experiences growing up that maybe triggered all of these kind of interests, or did you?
Why am I a nerd about it? I'm sure I did. I think part of it is the unseen hand of it, right? Like, I have very clear memories of, as a kid, exploring the Milwaukee Public Museum, right? And streets of old Milwaukee, and that sensory engagement. Like, I remember what it smelled like. I remember the light. I remember the textures and the colors of it. I'm just a very kind of sensory person. So for that, I have those very clear sense memories of that. I was lucky enough to grow up in a place surrounded by a lot of historic spaces. My parents ran what's now called Shaker Egg Alley in Mineral Point. And so it's a series of historic buildings. And that was my backyard. That was my playground. So the idea of having a very strong sense of place and exploring and thinking about what life would have been like. And, if I lived here, I would want to do this, and that world building, and all kids do that, and some do it in a basement playing D&D, and some do it with comic books. And I did it dressing up and running around the woods pretending I was Caddy Woodlawn, and just the play aspect of it, and finding places where I could play. It's what I experienced and what I hope to create for folks. And even if you're 70, I want you to come out here and play a little bit and create that space.
Yeah, well, you still get to play dress up, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that experience? So this is a living history kind of place. So people are modeling living in period outfits. Can you talk to me a little bit about how Old World Wisconsin approaches the living history aspect of people portraying all these different history elements?
Yeah, absolutely. I think costuming is, it's the most visual. It's the one you see right away, but it's a much larger, it's about the furnishings and material culture and what they're cooking and how they're preparing it. And it's everything, right? If you think about what you did today, how would that be interpreted 200 years from now? But the clothing is one of the most visual. It's the first thing you see, and it has a huge impact. We want people to feel transported when they're here. And one of the strongest ways to do that is not just with old buildings, because you can see old buildings lots of places, but to see people who look like they belong in those spaces. The historic clothing, you carry yourself a little bit differently when you wear them. And so it kind of puts us in the right headspace. So the value for us is that it kind of gets us where we need to be. For our guest, it sets the stage right away. Hey, this is where we are. It's also, clothing isn't intimidating to people. And so you might be hesitant to ask a question about architecture that looks weird. Because I don't really know what that is. That like a frieze or like a pediment? I don't know how to ask that question about the architecture. But most people wear clothes. So it's a very kind of even playing field. And they can ask easy questions about the clothes to start that process of exploration and asking questions. So we love talking about our clothes. That's there, and they change, and people might not notice the details, but we'll talk about it anytime we're asked about it.
So how do you train people to do this? Or I guess maybe the other question is, why does somebody want to do this?
Because it is the best job in the world. How do you train someone to do that? It's a very specific set of skills. We do some pretty unique things here with hiring in that we really focus on the soft skills. You could be a PhD on Polish immigration to Wisconsin and know everything about it, which is great. It doesn't mean that you're going to be a great experience facilitator, which is what we call all the people out there in funny costumes. It's about thinking on your feet and being dynamic and being really welcoming, meeting our guests where they are, sharing stories, but knowing not to suck all the air out of the room because it's not about you. You're that nerdy friend who's going to get them really excited about this story and see where they want to go with it. So we focus on people who have really great soft skills, people who are people, which does not mean you need to be an extrovert. Like, I am an extroverted introvert, right? Like, I go to work and I talk to people and I'm on and I show them a good time and I go home and I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm in my jammies with my cat. Like, I'm an introvert. So soft skills, thinking on your feet, people who are creative, people who are natural storytellers. And then the hard skills, how do you use this loom? How do you harvest an heirloom garden? How do you cook all these historic foods? We can teach you that. Like, we can teach the hard skills, the soft skills. You can coach and you can support and you can nurture, but it's very hard to teach somebody those things. So part of it is just being really self-aware and knowing what you need to work on and what you're really good at. We have people out here who are phenomenal with our audience that we call our littles, right? So our little kids who come out like third grade and under, they're great with the littles. They don't like the huge tour group so much, and there's others who are terrified of the littles, but they're really great with giant high school groups that come in here. So just being really self-aware and knowing what your talents are, what you bring to the table. That's what makes our team awesome, is that we've got this dynamic mix of people who bring different things to the table.
Just to paint a picture in people's minds, what are some of the roles that people are playing that are dressing up? What are some of the different things that people would be?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you use the term role. So everything we do here is what we call third person. So if I were to hire you, I would hire you because you are Craig and it is today, but you have all these skills that we need. And I wouldn't want you to pretend to be Mr. Fossebrecke in 1840. I want you to be you. So we're not playing characters per se, but we do have different tasks and different experiences, and those depend on the spaces. So we have tradespeople. So we have people who can work in the woodshed. We have, it's interesting, he was trained as a shoemaker, but then when factory made shoes became popular, he took his skills and started doing some harness work and started doing some repairs. So it's about entrepreneurship. And so we have people who work in this leather shop talking about the different facets of this. blacksmith, leather workers, woodworkers, different cooks, gardeners. We have people who spin and do wool dyeing using things from our gardens. All of our gardens are heirloom. So figuring out how to get green from marigold blossoms and using all the wool that we have washed and picked and carded and spun here on site. So it's all about keeping these traditions alive. And so the people who join our team, sometimes they have a very specific skill set in terms of those hard skills, but oftentimes it's just this deep desire to keep these traditions present because they know what fertile ground it is for storytelling and engagement, and they learn.
What do you want somebody who comes here to take away when they leave? Or what are the big things that you're hoping they get out of the experience?
Thinking about your story and thinking about the story of this place that we call home. We have awesome stories to tell you, but guests also have amazing stories to tell us. This is hard to do audio wise, but we always talk about a Venn diagram, right? So if you picture a Venn diagram and there's two circles coming together, and one of those circles is what we have to share, and the other one is what guests bring with them. And for us, an awesome day is where those circles intersect. And it's the thinking about things in a new way. So I would love for everybody who comes here to say, this is amazing. Let's buy a membership and come back 10 times a year. That would be awesome. But I would also be really, really happy if guests leave and maybe it's in the car on your way home or a week or two after your visit, you are thinking about your own story or looking at the buildings in your town a little bit differently and thinking about things like identity and sense of place and story and some different points of view. We want you to just kind of be chewing on these ideas after you leave.
Do you have a favorite building on site?
I love them all for different things. I do have a favorite space that pairs with the time of day. Our 1910 Finnish home has just this fantastic farmyard in front of it. And in the morning, when no one's here yet, I love the site when it is busy and filled with guests. I love it. I also love it when no one else is here. And that space is kind of just mine, and there's dew on the grass and the sunlight's coming in. And for me, that's that feeling like I've been transported. Like that door is going to open and Heikki Ketala is going to step out on his way to do chores that morning. And that kitchen just smells amazing. And it's one of those, if those walls could talk, to think about all the cups of coffee that were had around that table, all the conversations that were had at that table. It's just a very evocative space for me. And you could feel that way about any building on site. I mean, just if the walls could talk. But for me, that Ketala home in the 1910 Finnish area it's my little magical space to go to.
I imagine if you're here long enough, you spend enough time here, there's so many different like history rabbit holes you can go down and just be like, I am going to be about this for like the next 5 years. I'm going to read everything about this. And like you can just go down a rabbit hole on so many different aspects of being here. I want to know, like, what was the last one that you went down that you just like an obsession you had with something here?
Oh my gosh. The number of rabbit holes we stumbled down. I went down a penmanship rabbit hole a couple of months ago. It was pretty intense. Debates of if we're doing Spencerian or what we're going to teach. I will say my most recent rabbit hole has been less about a specific content and more about these larger ideas of story and how it works. And how do you talk about immigration and how do you use the past to connect to the present? And it's taken me down this fabulous rabbit hole that has intersected with a lot of Buddhist studies and a lot of peace studies and some like meditation work about like how the mind works and how stories work. So that's been it's kind of a fabulous rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And I am still deep in the Warren right now with it. But there's a concept called the 200-year present. And it's this meditation technique where you think about where you are right now in time. And then you think back to people who, like when you were a child, who's the oldest person you knew and when were they born? So for me, my great-grandma Vera, she was born in the teens, 19-teens. And then you think about the youngest person you know right now. My friend Emily just had a little baby, Eleanor, and how long Eleanor is going to live. A very long time. So another 100 years. And it gives you this like 200-year window. And to think about that as your present, as opposed to my present is like, well, it's Tuesday. But
Right.
this 200-year window, because those are the people who had an influence on you and the people on whom you will have an influence. And so when you start thinking about a present moment as this 200-year window, it kind of opens up this whole world of like, what is history and what is historic and what have been the cultural influences and the speed at which culture moves. And that is the rabbit hole that I am currently in the middle of. And it's kind of amazing.
That's a big one.
That's a big one.
That's a lot of different aspects. That's awesome though. I love that. We were talking a little bit about this before off mic. You have a nice Disney poster on your wall.
I do, yeah.
A layout, basically a map of Disneyland.
Yeah, 50th anniversary of Disneyland.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you like Disneyland. You like Disney and all things Disney, I guess. So when you think about that, it's a different place than here, but there's got to be some similarities. And I'm wondering how you see like your place at Old World, Wisconsin, being connected or not connected with a place like Disney.
So when you asked earlier about like, formative experiences, a Disney one on the Disney Channel, back when the Disney Channel showed old-fashioned stuff, they would show these videos that were made in the 50s and 60s of Walt Disney standing there with like all the scale models and his pointer, like talking about how he was going to build Disney World, right? And this is what the Imagineers designed. And I loved those. And I guess that was the roots of, experience design and thinking about, well, what would it smell like and what would it taste like and what would textures would be under your feet and what would you see? And so that idea of crafting worlds and world building, it's a trap I fell into quite early. And it has this Disney tie. So I think part of it is that, of just that feeling transported, feeling like you are in a true world and all facets of that world have been considered to make it as immersive as possible for you. The other thing that we use a lot of Disney influence and guidelines today is the customer service piece of it and feeling like it's going to be magical and everything's going to be taken care of and we're thinking of all of it. Even things like how we pick up trash and how we welcome guests and greet guests and thinking of all aspects of their experience. People have a lot of options. Like they don't have to come hang out with us. We want to make sure when they come to spend time here that it's going to be amazing. And you're going to come back not only for the experience you had on site, but for the people who hosted you and that you felt really welcomed and supported. And whether you like Moana or not, that's neither here nor there, but it's that idea of Disney service and just thinking about the inclusivity and the holisticness of your experience.
Moana is great.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's great, yeah.
It totally is. I'm kind of a Lin-Manuel fan.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to ask about was that, I know Old World Wisconsin does a lot of events, a lot of programming. I'm just trying to think of things we've been talking about offhand. Is like beer making has been a thing.
Yeah.
Old school baseball is vintage baseball, I should say, is a thing. Talk to me a little bit about some of the cooler events and activities. Maybe you can expound on those two a little bit, but some of the cool things you do throughout the year.
Yeah, so we've got the daily experience, right? And then we also have these other programmatic elements that we add. And some of them are layers to the daily experience, like when we brew beer. I don't have the upcoming year schedule, but for this past year, it's about every other Saturday we brew, inspired by historic recipes. And again, it's a way to take a facet of history, a cultural expression, and bring it to life for people so you can geek out about the history, about the science, the immigration tie to it. Ton of home brewers. Beer people are super geeky. Like it's a world.
It is. Yeah.
And I am not a beer person, but I've learned a lot. So it's a way to look at this historic tradition, but also look at it as a living tradition and how is it continuing today. Plus, it provides people with a nice, refreshing beverage when they're out here in the summer. We also have other programs that are separate from our daily experience. So we just finished Legends and Lore, which is our really big Halloween event. People always want to be out here at night. And frankly, at the end of a busy Saturday in July, we are too tired. We are going home. But for Legends and Lore, it starts at 5:30 at night and it goes until 9:30 at night. So it's a chance to be out here and see the buildings at night. And, we could just do a haunted house. We could just do a jump scare. But what we do that's really special with it is we look into the history and look for inspiration for the stories that immigrants have brought to this place. And the idea that these legends and this lore is alive tonight. And so as you move through our historic spaces, then you encounter all these different stories. And some stories we bring, and some stories are far more ancient than any of us. And perhaps they were waiting for us here in the woods. And the woods are very creepy at night, so we take advantage of that. We do great Christmas programming. July 4th is really popular. We do a big parade, pie eating contest, where ironically you win a pie after the pie eating contest. But it's a way there are people who want that daily experience. They want the historic piece. And then others just love to come for festivals. They like to come for big events, and that's how they consume culture. So it's a way to have different offerings for different audience types, for the baseball folks, for the beer folks. I've yet to find somebody who hasn't found something here that they could kind of sink their teeth into and saw themselves in.
Anything new on the radar as far as programs that you're working on? Anything,
Yeah,
hasn't been announced yet?
Yeah. The inside scoop. Yeah. So we have a big chunk of our audience that really enjoys the Little House on the Prairie stories and the Laura Ingalls Wilder piece of it. So that's something that we're going to be bringing back on Wednesdays during our peak summer Wilder Wednesdays. And we love Laura because she's a fantastic gateway drug to history, right? She wrote these stories about Wisconsin, and people think that they are true stories, but they are actually shelved under fiction. They are fictional stories, but we love that because it allows people to think about story and what did she leave in and what did she take out. And so it's a great way to bring people in from that nostalgia, that easy entrance, young readers. They're great accessible books. And then it's a launch pad for us to talk about these bigger stories of the stories we tell ourselves. So Laura is coming. People love Laura. We are going to be continuing Wisconsin Journey in the fall. We also have some awesome new school programs. And that's where a lot of our effort has been in the past couple months, is developing new programs, including one called Village Quest, which is like instead of this kids coming and, okay, now you're going to go here and do a thing, and then you'll walk over here and do a thing. We put the kids in teams of about 8, and we set them loose in our historic village, and they have a mystery that they need to solve. People are disappearing from history. Their stories are being forgotten. And the kids have to travel back in time and go to different time periods and try and gather as many clues from primary and secondary sources, which teachers love, as many clues as they can, and try and document this person's life, try and find their story before they are forgotten. And so it really puts the kids totally in control of the experience, and it leverages their different skill sets, and they get to control their day and think about how history works and ask themselves, who's going to tell our story? Who is going to tell your story 100 years from now, 200 years from now? How are you going to be remembered? In your own words, in somebody else's words, in a government document? And they get to explore these historic lives through different sources, letters written about people, firsthand accounts, census records. And we put the kids in charge and we let them go for it. And they're awesome at it. It's super fun. We really love this program.
I love the gamification of history. It's
cool. Yeah. Gameplay, it's fantastic. It's a natural state. We want to play. We want to figure things out. We want to solve puzzles. And historians are awesome. If you're ever building a pub quiz team, get a historian on your team. We are puzzle people. We are nerds. And we love to play games.
Anything else they should know about Old World Wisconsin as we're kind of wrapping this up? Anything else that we need to talk about or people need to know about?
Come and hang out with us. I think, we see guests at a couple of different points in your life, right? We see you on your 4th grade field trip. We see you. We know you've been here. So you're here on your 4th grade field trip. You come when your kids are in 4th grade, and you come when your grandkids are in 4th grade. And I would like to yes and that and say, come back. Our stories are always here, and they're always changing, and your stories are always changing. And it's like when you read a book at different points during your life, it means different things to you. And we're not here to tell a story. We're here to be a place about stories. And so when guests keep coming back to us again and again, we're going to be different things for them at different points in their life, different points in their family's life. And we love that. And we want to be that for people. We've also changed a lot in the last 5-10 years, just in terms of the landscape. Every garden here, there's over 14 heirloom gardens. Every plant that goes in the ground is the right plant for that ethnic community and that time period. All of the animals that are here are heritage. So it's just that sensory treat, right? The costuming, the sights, the sounds, the smells. So if you haven't treated yourself in a while to just feeling completely transported and just get out of your everyday, like I'm looking at the cell phone, I'm going to work, I'm in the car, I'm driving, like the rut, right? Let us help you step outside of that and treat yourself.
Oh, great. That's a good way to end.
All right. Well, thanks for coming to hang out.
Yeah, man, it was fun. Thank you to Anna for the talk and the tour around the site. Anna's an old friend, and it was great to reconnect. Make sure to subscribe to the Wisconsin Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. Also stay in the loop about the pod by visiting wispod.com and following the show on Twitter at WisPodcast and on Facebook at the Wisconsin Podcast. Cheers.